Hello and welcome to episode 18 of Cold Case Christmas 2024. In this episode, we're dialing the clock back 60 years to October of 1964, when a 15-year-old teen took his two dogs, two German Short-Haired Pointers, for a walk and never came home. That young man was Reed Jeppson. Was he murdered by the pedophile next door? Let's tell his story. Reed Taylor Jeppson was one of, I think, 13 children, including Reed, 13 children. But one child died when she was an infant, so I believe that Reed had 11 living siblings. Now, sources vary a little bit on the number of children. The Jeppson family were Mormons, and they lived in Salt Lake City in Utah. Reed, I believe, was child number 9, and his closest aged brother, John, I think was a year or two older than him. And we'll get into John shortly. As Mormons, the Jeppson family were very religious. Their family life in many ways revolved around the church. That takes us to the day that Reed and both of his dogs disappeared. It was October the 11th, 1964. It was a Sunday, and as it was a Sunday, the family had been to church. After his family returned home from church, the family were, I guess, doing their own thing, and one of Reed's sisters was preparing lunch. Reed said that he was going to go and feed his dogs. So these were two German Short-Haired Pointers. For those not familiar with the breed, German Short-Haired Pointers have traditionally been bred and used to hunt birds. And that's what Reed was training these dogs to do. He had an adult and a puppy. I don't know how old the pup was, but a puppy. The two dogs lived in a kennel in the backyard. So Reed went out to feed the dogs and he didn't come back. So his sister and other family members assumed that he'd gone to walk the dogs. But by the evening, they became very concerned. If something had happened to Reed, why hadn't the dogs made their way back home? Both Reed and the dogs were missing. So they called the police. An exhaustive search was performed in and around Salt Lake City, as well as all the foothills and the outlying countryside. A friend of the family came forward and said that they'd seen Reed walking his two dogs near the old St. Mary of the Wasatch building, near Wasatch Boulevard, around 1 p.m. But there was nothing further. Now, the 1 p.m. timeline kind of tracked with Reed feeding his dogs and taking them for a walk. So where did Reed go between the St. Mary building and his home? Where did he go? Now, initially, the police said that there was no signs of foul play and that perhaps he'd run away. There was no signs that Reed was unhappy with his life, but let's just assume that Reed's a runaway. There was a lead suggesting that Reed might have travelled to Missouri to visit a girl that he'd met while working on a ranch the summer before. However, this girl had not seen Reed. Reed wasn't in Missouri, so this lead went nowhere. The family, of course, were questioned, and in particular, Reed's older brother, John. Very close in age. They were best friends. They shared a room. It was actually one of Reed's friends who lived in their neighbourhood who implicated John. And the police questioned him, really, really questioned him. And John actually tells his story on this YouTube channel, The Big Family Jewels. Now, this channel is run by Julie, and she is Reed Jeppson's niece. I'm not going to play a clip from that particular episode, but on one episode, John Jeppson tells his story and tells about how the police questioned him and how upsetting it was because, John and Reed were best friends, so why anybody would implicate John, who knows? Maybe this person had seen John and Reed arguing, maybe, I don't know. because that's what brothers do. That's what families do. So every lead went cold. That is until 2010. The case had been closed in 1966, but it was reopened in 2010 for a very good reason. Before we get into that, I just want to talk about one further tragedy that happened to the Jeppson family after Reed's disappearance in October 1964. A year and some later, actually 59 years to this very day, December 18th, 1965, Reed Jeppson's father ended his own life. Now, Reed's mother and some of his siblings have passed away. They went to their graves not knowing what happened to Reed. But some of his siblings and nieces, nephews are still here, and they want answers. So let's talk about the reopening of the case and why. Julie here in this video, and I'll leave a link to it in the description box. I'm just going to play a little clip from it. She interviews one of the police officers who worked on the case after it was reopened.
So, Detective Cody Logie, tell us what you know, what you found out, and how this reopened.
Okay, so I was attached to the homicide missing person unit here at the Salt Lake City Police Department, and I received a call from Suzanne, and she had called to say, hey, I seen a news story where the Sheriff's Department located some bones up Mill Creek Canyon, some human remains, and she was wondering if there was any way to know if that was her missing brother, Reed.
Okay, this is where I'll push pause. Okay, so this is the rumor going around in my family, and with among my cousins, we thought, or we heard that were there ever 2 bags of bones in a backyard?
Okay, we're gonna get to that.
Okay, so this is different. Okay.
So the bags of bones, yeah, we'll absolutely get to that because that happened in 2012. But this is 2010 that this officer is talking about.
Different. This is what opened the case and got me involved back in May 12th of 2010.
Because I've never even heard about bones in Mill Creek Canyon.
Yeah.
Maybe they're unrelated.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so she had asked about that, and I said, can you tell me a little bit about your brother who was missing? And she gave me his name and his date of birth, and I quickly typed it into my database, into my computer, and I couldn't find anything. I'm like, I'm not seeing anything in the system. Can you give me some information? Where this happened? What was the date? And she gave me some information, and I started doing some research and discovered that this case was sold back in 1964. It was placed on microfiche down in our records unit. So I went and pulled the case and started looking at the case, and we quickly discovered that the bones in Mill Creek were not the remains of Reed Jeppson. They discovered it was remains from a missing person, I think a hiker or a hunter, and there was some identification. There was something there that indicated it wasn't that old, and it wasn't Reed Jeppson.
So that was in 2010. So it was good for that person's family that they got a resolution. The bones were human that had been found, but they just weren't Reed Jeppson. And Reed's case was so old, it had been closed in 1966, that it had never been digitalised. So this is where the new investigation began. But it kind of began and then fizzled out until 2012. The police received a tip from a couple who lived in the house next door to where the Jeppsons live at the time that Reed disappeared. So they were doing some work on their property, right? They'd acquired it from the original owner who was there at the time that Reed Jeppson disappeared. At the time Reed Jeppson disappeared, that house was occupied by a doctor, well-respected doctor. So the couple who bought this house off the well-respected doctor were doing some work on their house, and they found 2 bags of bones. They opened one of the bags, and there were dismembered remains of what they believed to be a dog. They didn't open the second trash bag, but they assumed that that trash bag contained either bones from the same dog or a different dog. They took photographs, but they threw the bones away. Now, somebody visited them and said that as a boy, he visited that house and the occupant at the time sexually abused him. So they went to the police, showed the police the pictures of these bones, And as this was next door to where Reed Jeppson lived, they got the story of the abuse. They started to do some digging, and they found numerous other people who'd allegedly also been abused by this man, the respected doctor, who lived next door to Reed Jeppson. So the police went and did a thorough search of that house and those grounds, thinking, well, if this doctor's a pedo, maybe he murdered Reed Jeppson and both of the dogs, put the body dismembered in trash bags like the dogs. They couldn't find any more remains on that property. So it's intriguing. It's really intriguing. Now, the family have always believed that Reed was abducted, that he'd never have left of his own volition. If he'd had an accident, then the dogs would have made their way home. You know, it had to be an accident so severe that both of the dogs and Reed were all killed. It's kind of unlikely, I mean, it's possible, but kind of unlikely that all three would die in an accident, just walking around like the local area. So when this all came out, you know, there's been so many rumours and stuff, you know, over the years, you know, what could have possibly happened to Reed, that members of the family, some of the siblings of Reed who are still alive, they believe that Reed was propositioned by this doctor and Reed perhaps put up a fight. They had evidence that this doctor groomed young boys and abused them. So it's not a stretch, is it? It's not a stretch. It's not wild to think that perhaps Reed had been propositioned by this doctor. Reed had taken, you know, offence. Reed was not going to go along with any of this. And the doctor, for whatever reason, things got out of hand and Reed ended up dead. So he had to kill the dogs so the dogs wouldn't go home. Please do go and listen to this episode here. I'll leave a link, as I said, in the description box because it's absolutely fascinating. It's fascinating how much more there is to this case. So much more. Let me know what you think. Do you think that Reed was murdered by the pedo next door? Or do you have another theory? Let me know. Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next episode of Cold Case Christmas. Bye, guys.